Mhm.
So leaky gut is another way that impairs testosterone. And I would say those are the two primary ways is that gut health is impacting testosterone. It's not digesting and absorbing the nutrients that we need, and
Mhm.
then creating an inflammatory response with leaky gut that is sort of system wide.
Weaponized body.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Weaponized Body Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Hewitt. And today I've got a special guest on the podcast with me, Andrew Martin. So, Andrew Martin's the founder of Precision Human Optimization. He works with high performing executives to optimize their health at the highest level. So, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited.
So, Andrew, I think I've known you for, I guess, over 10 years, right? So,
Yeah, I was
uh,
actually doing the math in my car.
I know.
It's been 10 years.
Yeah, I think so. So I knew Andrew when he was growing up in the sport of CrossFit, just getting going as a trainer. He's a former chiropractic patient of mine, so we've known each other for quite some time.
Yeah, you were like the very start of my like health journey too. That brought me here, which is pretty cool.
Oh,
It's
that's
come full
awesome.
circle. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and look where you are now, man. You're kicking butt in Connecticut. There, you're married with you got a young, is it daughter at home, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I know what that's about.
6 months.
Yeah, dude, and you're crushing it with the Precision Human Optimization company. Helping guys all over the world really optimize their health.
Mhm.
So I want to get into just right off the bat, just kind of tell the listeners like where you came from, how you got into this whole journey of health and fitness and wellness, and how you got to where you are today with your company.
Yeah, sure. So starting back from the beginning is I was an athlete, probably just like most people watching this show. And never really had to worry about my health, like growing up playing sports and whatnot. It was never really an issue for me. Never thought twice about it, to be honest with you. And then when I got to college, I stopped playing sports and I started gaining weight and things started going south for me. And I got into CrossFit. And what was interesting was I lost weight. I like got in shape. I was, you know, doing well in the sport of CrossFit, but I was a disaster. And so I found Ryan because I had all these injuries.
Mm.
I had no energy. I couldn't recover. I had all these problems that you wouldn't, from the outside in, you wouldn't really see that I was having. Right. And, Ryan helped me a ton on that journey, but I also was seeing a naturopath, got regular blood work done from them as well. So like I was trying to figure out what was going on inside of me because I felt like I was doing everything right outside and just like it wasn't working. Right. Like I looked fine from the outside in, but on the inside I felt terrible.
Mhm.
Um, and long story short, $20,000 later, seeing all these specialists, getting sent around from my medical doctors, like the holistic path kind of came up for me, and you and the naturopath kind of helped me on my journey and figuring out what was happening on the inside. Um, and that sort of sent me down my own journey. I was working in biotech at the time. So
Yeah.
my background is human biology and biochemistry, and sort of sent me down my own journey to like go help people figure this out for themselves as well, optimize their health and their performance. Performance is still a huge piece of my life. Like I love getting after it and training hard. So yeah, sent me down the path of helping people in that regard. And that was when I was 20 and met you. And now 10 years later, we're here. I have my own company and we're doing it on a bigger scale. Originally I was doing it, in a gym. And yeah, it's been a fun journey because I didn't actually think I would ever get to use what I learned in biochemistry and
Mhm.
biology when I started coaching people.
Mhm.
And now obviously I use it so much because we're looking at people's internal health, their gut health, their hormones, their inflammation, micronutrient status, all of that, and able to actually help them figure out what these root cause issues are. And that's really what everything I do is help people identify what the root cause of their health and performance constraints are so they can solve them without going on medication or really like just being shunned by the medical system saying, oh, everything looks normal and you don't have any issues. we are also able to help people go a little bit deeper and figure out what's going on with them.
Yeah, we align a lot in that way. Of course, that was my evolution as an athlete, but also as a provider, right? As a practitioner, just rounding out my services by just offering more diagnostics to see really what's going on under the hood, not just from like a physical standpoint, joint movement, strength, flexibility, but metabolically, what's happening. It's just you cannot ignore that piece. It's just such a massive part of thriving, whether it's an athlete or just like an everyday person who just wants to have a great experience with how they feel and perform and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I want to
Yeah.
cut straight to it with you. So I know like a big part of what you offer as an executive coach is helping people from that metabolic standpoint, but through your journey and through a lot of guys that you've helped them really restore a lot when it comes to their gut health and digestion, right? And how you found that that's really the source and root cause of a lot of things that are shocking to most people, such as low testosterone, such as metabolic dysfunctions, such as recovery issues, sleep problems. So what I wanted to get into with you is like, let's talk about testosterone first, as far as like a high performing man, for example, who wants like muscle, drive, focus. How does gut health affect testosterone specifically?
Yeah. So gut health affects testosterone in several ways, right? There are obviously it can impact it positively if you have good gut health, but it can more often impact it negatively when we have specific problems as it relates to our gut health. And there are a few key problems that could be happening. Obviously, the gut is incredibly important to nearly every other function because when we consume food, we have to be able to digest that food, assimilate protein from it, and then be able to absorb, the nutrients from that food and use it for other processes in the body. And when that doesn't happen properly, we wind up with a lot of issues. With the production of testosterone specifically, you know, we need to be able to digest proteins and fats specifically because one of the precursors for testosterone is cholesterol, and you need enough fat for this, for that to happen properly. So, maybe it would be best if we cover quickly like how testosterone is even made, and then we can talk about how gut health impacts that.
Yeah.
So, you have the two hormones in the brain, LH and FSH, that kind of go to the testes for men and stimulate the production of testosterone. But that process starts by the testes producing pregnenolone, right? And pregnenolone, you need cholesterol and vitamin B5 to come together and make pregnenolone. So if we're not absorbing fats well, fat malabsorption and maldigestion is a super common issue that I see. Whether it be because there's not enough bile or low stomach acid issues, things like that are not properly breaking down the foods that we're eating, or people are just like chronically, in 20 years ago, people doing low fat diets that was obviously not helpful for people, and we have since changed that. I think people are now like on low carb trend, which is also not awesome for testosterone. So, but regardless, we have to have enough cholesterol and vitamin B5. So if we're not, absorbing those nutrients, the specific micronutrients there from our food, we're not going to have the precursors to even make testosterone.
Right. So there's like an intake thing, right? So it's like when I teach people about that, it's like really you think about it in 3 tiers, right? It's like, are you intaking the right nutrients? Are you breaking down and absorbing the right nutrients? Or are those nutrients just altogether leaving your body without being absorbed, right?
Yeah. What's really cool about that is like we can measure on a stool test. Like I can see if you have too much fat in your stool.
Right.
And I can also see like if you have the bile metabolites that we need to have, things like that. So we can really like get pinpointed, like, yeah, you're clearly not digesting your fats well, and that's hindering your testosterone production. So that's one way that gut health impacts testosterone. The other is the most common one though is leaky gut. And for the audience, leaky gut in the scientific community is known as intestinal permeability, but it's basically essentially when we get these microscopic holes in the lining of our GI tract, and things can basically slip from the GI into our bloodstream, and it's not good for a whole host of reasons. The main one that impacts testosterone specifically is that lipopolysaccharides, which are incredibly inflammatory, can seep into the intestinal and into the bloodstream from the intestines, and directly inhibit the production of LH in the brain, which is the signal for testosterone, and directly inhibit the testes from producing pregnenolone. So you get two different ways that leaky gut impacts testosterone production there, and it can be a huge decrease. Like I had a guy who when he started his testosterone, it wasn't that low. It was like in the 400s, but he wasn't feeling good. And we just did a gut protocol with him, and it was like 780 after we
Wow.
went through it. The
That's
only
amazing.
difference we did,
Wow.
right, is just heal his gut. And he had a lot, but he had a lot of intestinal permeability, and you can tell this on a stool analysis as well. But I mean, if you live an inflammatory lifestyle, you probably have leaky gut. Like when you drink alcohol, we can measure those lipopolysaccharides in your bloodstream within 30 minutes of drinking alcohol. There is a certain threshold, but like it's not that much. So if you're like consistently drinking on a regular basis, it's gonna impair your testosterone that way. Inflammatory foods that we eat, toxin exposure, those things can all like create these microscopic holes in our GL lining, because your GL lining is only one cell layer thick. It's incredibly thin. So it's super prone to becoming too permeable. And it needs to be permeable enough to like absorb those micronutrients and for certain things to pass through. The problem becomes when it becomes too permeable and those gaps become too big. So leaky gut is another way that impairs testosterone. And I would say those are the two primary ways is that gut health is impacting testosterone. It's not digesting and absorbing the nutrients that we need, and then creating an inflammatory response with leaky gut that is sort of system wide.
So maybe touch on the most common things that you see that create that inflammatory response, or that that problem for the gut.
Sure. Yeah, the first one, alcohol, like we touched on before. Alcohol for sure. The others that create leaky gut really are, and it's not always, but gluten, like high amounts of gluten can create those microscopic holes in the gut as well. And then the thing that people don't realize is that exercise also does it. So it's really comes down to like overtraining though. We see this a lot in like endurance athletes or marathon runners,
right?
That sort of thing, and that's not to discourage people watching this from exercising. It's just like, you need to be able to recover from your exercise, right? We need to be getting enough protein, and we need to be able to actually repair the GI lining, because it's going to happen with long endurance activity when we are in a catabolic state in the meantime. Part of that could, part of that breakdown process, catabolism being, the breakdown of tissues. Part of that process is breaking down the GI wall. And so, that is a huge piece of the problem for the athlete community, is when we're not getting enough protein in and enough post-workout recovery, or if we're just overtraining in general. Like this was definitely a part of my issue.
Right.
And when I used to see Ryan, I was training 4 to 5 hours a day, and wondering why my GI was a disaster. My testosterone was in the 300s, and I was 20 years old. So I think those are some common issues. The other one that's a really big problem for a lot of people is essentially just high levels of cortisol over a long time.
Right. I was going to say that.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about catabolism, right? So cortisol being the main hormone in catabolic activities, right? When you're any chronic stress, right? So whether it's like chronic endurance or overtraining, right? But also like mental, emotional stress, right?
Yeah. Mental, emotional stress from work or family or trauma. Also stress from like environmental toxins and exposure to things like mold or toxic heavy metals. I mean, the list of things that can cause adrenal dysfunction and cortisol dysregulation is like endless,
Yes. Yeah.
And I think people want to make it as simple as like, oh, just like take ashwagandha, you'll be fine. And it's just not the case,
Take a little horny goat weed, good to go.
Yeah, right. So yeah, cortisol elevation over a long period of time is definitely contributes to leaky gut. But the reverse piece of that is like, your gut health also contributes to your adrenal function, is also like directly impacts adrenal function. Usually, we see a lot of people who have so we do a version of a Dutch test, which is basically looking at your cortisol over the course of a day, because cortisol is a hormone that fluctuates dramatically. In the morning, we should see this big rise because cortisol is important for making you feel awake, right, and energized. So, it is a very important hormone. And then we should see it drop and sort of have this downward trend for a little bit and then kind of flatten out for the rest of the day. And we see a lot of people who don't have that good cortisol awakening response where their cortisol doesn't spike in the morning. And so they have this sort of flat curve over the course of the day as well. And a lot of times that is directly caused by gut microbiome issues, whether it be, bacterial overgrowth like SIBO or other infections that could be going on. And what's interesting is like certain infections can just cause like high cortisol all day, and others can cause like super low cortisol. So it really depends on the problem at hand here. But either one of those cortisol issues has their problems, right?
Right.
If it's too high, obviously that causes too much catabolism. If it's too low, people have low energy, and
that's a saliva test, right?
it's a
The
saliva
Dutch
test.
test.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's
right.
fascinating because I see cortisol a lot of times responsible for I'll do plasma cortisol in the morning in a
Yeah.
fasted individual, and you can see are their cortisol levels optimal in the morning, which like you said, they should be near their highest. And a lot of times I see sleep dysregulation in people where they're getting cortisol spikes in the middle of the night, and that's
2
what's
a.m.
happening. Yeah, they're getting these wakeful
Yeah.
states in the middle of the night, and they're blaming whatever, the dog or a lot of times it's stress, gut function and stuff like that. But that's another symptom I see is and you can see how it snowballs on itself, right? It's like you sleep like shit, you don't absorb nutrients properly, your testosterone's low, you're dragging ass, you're not training anymore, and it just kind of snowballs.
Yeah, 100%.
Hmm.
And what's interesting about cortisol, right, and the production of it is if you have low cortisol, one of your body's strongest priorities is to prioritize making cortisol. And so what happens to men in testosterone and to women in testosterone too is we talked about pregnenolone being the precursor for testosterone, but it's also the precursor for cortisol.
Right.
And so, if you have a gut issue that's making your cortisol low, what ends up happening is when pregnenolone gets produced, it can go down one of two paths. And one of those paths leads to making testosterone, and the other path leads to making cortisol. And your body's always going to prioritize the path of making cortisol if we need it, because it's like imperative for us to be alive, right? It's a survival issue versus testosterone's not. Testosterone's just helps us feel good. It's a vitality thing. So, we see a lot of issues with that too, where gut dysfunction is causing adrenal issues, which is then causing low testosterone.
Right. So I could see how this could really impair someone's, desire to put on muscle, right? Like impact muscle growth. So just talk about how you see that impairing muscle growth specifically.
Yeah, totally. It will, if that process is happening and we have, either low cortisol reducing our drive and we're not training hard in the gym, and we have low testosterone as a byproduct, the things that are anabolic are hormones, strength training, and protein. And so if you have two of them that we're not doing, you're not going to be very anabolic and you're going to be more catabolic than, even if your cortisol is not high, you're still going to be catabolic in terms of the balance over the course of a day or a week. But the other thing with muscle growth is in going back to absorption of nutrients is you have to be able to break down and absorb the nutrients from your food, especially from your protein, right? So if you don't have the pancreatic enzymes or you have low stomach acid, a lot of times we end up with these large chunks of protein that don't get broken down. And then we don't actually be able to use those for muscle growth and repair. And they just end up in our stool and wasted. So we see that a lot with men who have a hard time building muscle. A lot of it, there's a huge component of honestly, a lot of people just aren't training hard enough. They're not eating enough. There's a big component of that. But then you do see the case where someone should based on how they're training, based on how they're fueling, it's not adding up. And, it comes down to a gut health issue where they're not actually getting these nutrients into their bloodstream and available for their body to use for repair processes. And same thing with metabolism, in fat loss, you need all these B vitamins and magnesium and nutrients that are important for mitochondrial function and in metabolic health as well, which is important for recovery. When we talk about metabolism, people think about weight loss, but it's also a big piece of gaining muscle. And the nutrients that we get from our food play a huge role in that.
Yeah, so it sounds like with the muscle building thing, you'll see guys that are training hard and can't recover, or they can't, or their perceived training is stressful for them, but it's actually the stimulus isn't that strong because they're inflamed, they're sore, and essentially stuck, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely see that a lot with guys, especially as they get older, near late 30s, 40s, when all of that sort of all the life they've lived up to that point has just ground them down to
Yeah.
the poor functioning organism that they are at that point. So
Yeah.
metabolism is kind of the word we're getting into now. So let's talk about that. So I see a lot of guys that are chasing like fat loss. So we talked about muscle building, like testosterone, muscle building, but let's talk about fat loss specifically. So, like guys that are chasing the fat loss, but kind of crash their metabolism,
Mm.
talk about how gut health kind of makes or breaks that metabolic function.
Yeah. So you're saying guys, they have that metabolic crash because they eat too little over a long enough period of time. To
Right.
clarify,
Or,
is that what
or
you're saying?
they're not absorbing, the proper nutrients and proteins. And, they're just
Yeah.
sort of like in this chronic stress state. Their cortisol levels are impaired, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge complex web
Mhm.
of a process here, right? So it's hard to boil it down to like, the one thing that's really driving an issue. But a lot of times it's this dysfunction where again, we're not getting those nutrients that we need. We have an elevated inflammatory response that is impairing metabolism. And then we have, cortisol dysregulation as well, which is also impairing metabolism, right? And it's a lot of times it's that kind of combo of things that is r- slowing down metabolic rate. But I do see this often where like, man, the amount of people in the fitness world that are like, it's just about calories
Mhm.
and how much you and like to a degree, like that does work for a lot of people. But
Mhm.
and for most people, truthfully, if they don't have dysfunction in their physiology. But if you have dysfunction in your physiology, the calories in versus calorie out equation does not work because calories out is so complex. It's not that
Right.
it's wrong. It's just that your calories out can be dramatically changed by a number of things.
Right.
One of them being how well your mitochondrial function is, and how uh, efficient your metabolism is. Right?
So what's like a dead giveaway if there's a dude who thinks he's putting in the work, he's eating what he thinks is well and training, but he's just not getting anywhere with let's say like fat loss around his midsection or whatnot. What's like a dead giveaway you see as far as like symptoms with that kind of guy?
As far as symptoms as it relates to gut health,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean bloating. Like
Mhm.
these are the hard part is I'm going to go over the most common ones,
Mhm.
but there are also a lot of symptoms with gut health that are asymptomatic or are
Mhm.
in places that you you wouldn't think of. So the most common ones that we like know are obvious. So like if you're bloated after you eat carbohydrates or fats or proteins, it really depends on the person. If
Mhm.
you get like protein farts, like it's
Yep.
not normal
Yep.
to fart and have terrible gas after eating a high protein meal,
It's not
right?
normal to smoke out your wife every time
No,
you
it's
eat a
not.
steak. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not normal, right?
Right.
Um, Constipation, people don't a lot of times don't realize we should have at least one bowel movement and preferably two, at least two every day,
Mhm.
right? Full bowel movements with a full evacuation.
Mhm.
Um, so like those are three common ones. And obviously diarrhea, the other option where like, you just have too many bowel movements because then we're definitely not absorbing,
Right.
the nutrients from our food if that's the case as well. So like those are specific to the GI, bloating, stomach pains, constipation, and really irregular bowel movements, right?
It's funny because not just guys but girls as well. Well, over time, it happens so often to them that they think it's normal, right? It's just like this is
Yeah.
kind of how I am. This is what happens. Like, I have a bowel movement every other day, or they're just like, yeah, my stool is always kind of loose.
Yeah.
They just don't have those like solid, consistent bowel movements that are like nice and firm. Those superhero poops, they're just like whatever it is. It's like intestinal disaster, I call it, right? And
Yeah.
and if you
Yeah.
think about it, like now, like we talked sort of high level, complicated, like how it affects your testosterone, how it affects your metabolism, how it affects muscle building. But literally, if you're getting nowhere and your stool is not healthy, then like duh, like that's your problem. It's
Yeah.
you got to start looking at what you're absorbing and what you're putting in your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the complicate like constipation and diarrhea, the complications from them are insane. I
Hmm.
mean, like if you are in this applies to men and women, but I find that more women are constipated in general.
Yep.
Um that might not be the case. It's just what I see in practice. But what happens is if you're not, when you think about, what do you think about a bowel movement is we're trying to get rid of waste.
Mhm.
So what happens, and your intestines are this organ that is meant to absorb things, right?
Mhm.
And so now we've got all this waste sitting has toxins in it, excess hormones, right? Things that we're supposed to get out of us, and it's just sitting in our intestines because we have slow transit. And what happens is these things get reabsorbed into the body, right?
Mhm.
And estrogen is one of them.
Mhm.
And estrogen reabsorption causes a ton of issues, especially for women in hormone imbalances.
Interesting. Yeah. Mhm.
Causes a ton of issues because it will still bind to the receptors, for the hormone receptors, but it's not super useful. So it just takes up space.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's true for testosterone. I'd have to double check on that. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's other issues as it relates to testosterone there. But we
Right.
also know that toxins get reabsorbed as well that are supposed to be excreted,
Mhm.
right? And so it's one of the reasons why gut issues will show up in other places, because if you have a few major ways that we detoxify. One of them is the gut, but then if you're not detoxifying the gut, then your liver is going to be having to do extra work. Your skin's going to have to be doing extra work. Your
Mhm.
lungs, right? So people will break out with skin issues,
Mhm.
rashes, eczema, autoimmune issues. Their liver becomes overwhelmed, and their liver enzymes go through the roof, right?
Mhm.
So there's a whole host of issues that come from that as well.
Yeah, and I think a big one that a lot of people don't realize is when you have a gut issue, you have a brain issue. When you have a brain issue, you have a gut issue. Your enteric nervous system, which is that network of nerves around your gut, is most of your nervous system in your body, right? Same with most of your immune function happens in your gut, and your brain is the direct communicator to that organ back and forth. And when your gut is inflamed, it means your brain is inflamed, right? And vice versa. So a lot of those, the connection between the hormones and all of the neurotransmitters and whatnot that go back, back and forth communicating, and how that just affects your physiology is just so complicated.
Yeah.
But, boiling it down to just most basic terms is hey, if your gut's screwed up, that means all the signaling from your brain is screwed up. Right. And that's why you see all these connections with things like IBS or, these sort of even autoimmune stuff, all sort of colitises and whatnot.
Hashimoto's.
Hashimoto's is a big one, right? So autoimmune diseases and how they're connected to the immune system, the nervous system, and just gut health in general, permeability and whatnot.
Yeah.
So let's get into maybe a couple of practical strategies then for
Yeah.
gut health optimization.
Yeah.
So let's give listeners a bit of a battle plan. So I guess we could just say what are some of the top 3 or 3 to 5, things that you could do to prioritize and take care of your gut health when it comes to optimizing testosterone, building muscle, and getting lean.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to go over some basics
Mhm.
to start with. There are some basics that anyone can do that will certainly help. Where I think people run into issues is they'll go find a supplement,
Mhm.
and it's so much more complicated than that, because certain supplements will make some issues better and make other issues worse, and their symptoms are the exact same. You might have constipation, right?
Sure. Mhm.
So I do think that I'd be careful with doing supplement plans for gut health specifically without doing research into why you're actually having that issue.
Mhm.
But in general, if we want to prioritize testosterone muscle building, people, eh, I have 3 main ones. Number 1 is you got to chew your food. Digestion starts in the mouth, and
Interesting. Yeah.
people do not break down their food in their mouth. Because we're eating, and this is going to be the second one. We're eating on watching screens on our phone, and we're just distracted. And there's hormonal issues there as it relates to hunger signaling and whatnot. But a lot of it is we just don't fully break down our food before it gets into our stomach, and now we're asking our stomach acid and our digestive enzymes to do way too much work, and they
Mm.
can't do it. Right.
Right.
So, 20 to 30 bites, people say. I don't know. I just chew it, and I just recommend chewing it until it's
Chew it
mush.
till
I'm
it's
not gonna
mush.
sit there and count.
I'd probably horrify you if you saw me eat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one thing I got to work on, man. I eat
Yeah.
I eat like I just got out of jail.
Well, yeah, it's hard. And it's one of those things where it's not going to impact everybody, right? But it definitely can. And it's one
Mhm.
of those strategies that your mother probably told it to you when you were 10. and you're like, no, that's I'm not going to do that.
I'm from
But
a
like,
family of 4 boys, so it was like, you better get it now or it's going to be gone.
yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, that's where it comes from, right?
Yep.
But yeah, chewing your food, man, it makes a big difference in just giving your body the ability to properly digest and break down the
Nice.
food that you
I
need,
like it.
Especially with protein.
Mhm.
And then carbohydrates as well, because the main way we break down carbohydrates is an enzyme that we have in the mouth, right? Mostly in the mouth is where amylase is. So,
Amylase, yeah.
we need to actually have our food in there enough to fully digest it and break it down. So that's one strategy, is obviously chewing your food. The second is like eating in front of screens and while you're distracted is terrible for digestion.
Mm.
We don't produce as much stomach acid as a result of it, and our digestion in general, it isn't as good as if you were like going to smell your food and like be involved in the eating experience. It actually does make a big difference.
Yeah, like
in
how
terms
it's
of-
supposed to be experienced naturally, right?
right, like the way that we've been doing it for millions of years.
You're
Yeah, it's just like the smells and like our intention in terms of how we're eating and what we're
Mhm.
doing while we're eating do make a big difference.
Right.
And then the other thing is eating while you're stressed. So like the environment that you eat in matters too. Like, so if people are eating at their desk,
Mhm.
like our brain associates places with certain states of being, right?
Mhm.
And so we're supposed to associate our bed with relaxation, but then people watch TV in their bed and they do shit that's, activating instead of down regulating. And then they have trouble sleeping. The same thing happens when we eat in environments that are in general stressful. Like eating at your desk where you work is supposed to be a stressful place, and a little bit, and like for the reason of focus, right? Because cortisol increases our focus. It has a benefit in that way, but it
Right.
also decreases digestion. That's why we have like rest and digest, right, as a state, and fight or flight, right? Fight or flight is like an intention and a focused state. So if you're doing that in front of your desk, then you're going to be in that intention and focused state, and you're not going to be in a rest and digest state, and it's not going to be optimal for digestion of your food.
Right.
So that's 3. And the last one, as far as like lifestyle, well, man, we can go into so many of these. Walking right after you eat,
That's a big one. Yep.
a huge one, right? A postprandial walk. Obviously has benefits for reducing blood sugar, but also helps in reduction of gastrointestinal issues that happen after eating, like bloating and whatnot.
Yeah, those are powerful, man. I don't think anybody was going to guess those were the 4. I think those are awesome. I love it. I'm going to give you a couple rapid fires before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Just because I know these are sort of like the hot buttons a lot of people think of. Let's talk about gut health supplements. Are they a waste of money, or should you be buying them?
They're a waste of money if you don't know what you're doing. They're incredibly helpful if you have the right protocol and you're solving the right issue.
And then how do you know that? You just find a practitioner who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, you find a practitioner who's going to do a comprehensive stool analysis on you, and
Love
then
it.
and the reason being is like, if we're trying to change your microbiome, you have so many microbes in your gut. You have to be specific about which ones you're changing.
Right. Specific to probiotics, you're saying. Yep.
Specific to probiotics, to antimicrobials.
Right.
Do you really need digestive enzymes, or is it going to make it worse? Those sort of things.
Cool. Fasting and gut health, yes or no?
It depends on the problem. In general, I don't love fasting in general. Intermittent fasting.
I say I like intermittent eating.
Yeah. I think I think it can be. So the thing here is like, your gut is the only system that doesn't get a break, right?
Yep,
Like you're
right.
consistently putting food in it. So there is an element of like it having positive benefits to do like a fast once a month, or an intermittent fast that's not like super extended, right? The 16-hour fast in general is totally fine. It's when people do like the 1 meal a day that we start to get an issue.
Totally agree. Last one, carbs and gut health. Carbs wreck your gut health, yes or no?
No.
I hear that one sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, carbs are in general, they trigger issues for people, but that's because they have another problem, like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Carbs are generally they trigger issues for people like that. So again, it just depends on your problem.
Nice, man. Andrew, I think this was gold, man. I think people will get a lot of value out of this, and how important your gut health is. So
Yeah.
talk about where people can find you and learn more about precision human optimization.
Yeah. So main places you can find me are Instagram at Andrew Martin Health, or on YouTube also at Andrew Martin Health. Either of those places have content. Most of my content's on Instagram, and then longer form, more educational content like this would be on YouTube.
Love it, man. Thanks so much for joining us. Guys, if you want to weaponize your body, gut health is one of the fundamentals that you gotta be taken care of. So take action on what we covered today. Thanks for tuning into the Weaponized Body Podcast, and I'll see you next time.